From Virginia's incorporation in 1607, the Church of England was the official church of the colony. To the north, just beyond Virginia, a different story developed. Like all Puritans, the British Pilgrims who landed at Plymouth in 1620 had once sought to reform the Church of England. What these Puritans wanted, however, was far more than what King James could tolerate. And so they left England, first for the Netherlands, and then on to the New World. They were Separatists. We know them today as the Pilgrims. Their eyes were fixed on heaven, but they made their earthly home in New England. The beginning of the 17th century was a remarkable time in British culture. Shakespeare was in full stride. Hamlet, King Lear, Othello, and Macbeth, all written within the span of the first decade. The Tempest in 1611. That same year, the Church of England published the King James Version of the Bible. The Protestant Reformation had not begun in England as it had elsewhere, with theologians like Luther in Germany and Calvin working in Switzerland. Motivated by personal and political problems, it was the king, Henry VIII, who had broken with the Catholic Church in 1534, taking his country with him. He dissolved Catholic monasteries and executed those who opposed his act of supremacy, the first victims in a century-long line of Christian martyrs. The Puritans wanted more, an eradication of all vestiges of Catholic worship and practice. Puritans hoped for a shift away from church rule by the king and his bishops. They wanted independent churches. The most zealous advocates for ecclesial independence were called Separatists. In 1606, having washed their hands of the Church of England, they set out to form an independent church. First at Scrooby in northern England, where the Separatists met in secret. Their leader was William Brewster, who would later sail to Plymouth with his fellow pilgrims. Under King James, however, it was dangerous to separate from the national church and illegal to meet in secret. When discovered, members of the congregation at Scrooby were fined or punished. In 1609, the Separatists fled to Leiden in the Netherlands. Increasingly, however, they feared they might lose their children to the Dutch culture. And there were clouds of war looming overhead. In fact, 1 year after the Separatists left the Netherlands, the truce with Spain collapsed, and the 80 Years' War resumed. The band of congregants looked to the New World. In 1620, Brewster procured a patent to develop a settlement in Virginia. 2 ships, the Speedwell and the Mayflower, were contracted to transport the settlers. But the Speedwell developed leaks and was judged unseaworthy. She and her passengers had to stay behind. With about 100 passengers plus crew members, the Mayflower set sail from Plymouth, England in September of that year. They had their eye on establishing a settlement near the Hudson River, which at the time lay just within the northern boundary of what was known as Virginia. Alas, a storm blew them off course, north, toward Cape Cod. After 66 days at sea, the Pilgrims had arrived. Where they landed lay beyond Virginia. Their patent thereby no longer held authority. Some passengers threatened to break out on their own. Before the Pilgrims disembarked, they wrote and signed an agreement. We know it today as the Mayflower Compact. We solemnly and mutually in the presence of God and one of another covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic. The document is at once a declaration of Separatist belief and a watershed in the history of American self-government. John Smith had named the area Plymouth in his map of 1614. The settlers retained that name partly in honor of where they departed from in England. As with Roanoke and Jamestown, the first year in Plymouth sorely tested the settlers. Only 52 of them survived. Among those who died was Rose Standish, wife to Captain Miles Standish. 3 siblings, Eleanor Moore, age 8, her brother Jasper, who was 7, and their 4-year-old sister Mary, all succumbed to the brutal winter. Their brother Richard survived. The following spring, a Patuxet native named Squanto taught the surviving colonists how to grow corn. Years earlier, Squanto had learned English, first from British explorers to New England, including John Smith. Then, having been captured by British Captain Thomas Hunt and sold into Spanish slavery, Squanto fled to England, where he became more fluent in the English language. At Plymouth, Governor William Bradford befriended the native, and he came to be known as simply Squanto. Sometime in the fall of 1621, likely in late September, the surviving settlers held a feast. About 90 Wampanoag natives joined them, not on invitation, but likely attracted by the noise created by the festivities. What is now considered to be the first Thanksgiving meal consisted of venison, wildfowl, fish, shellfish, and the corn that Squanto had taught the settlers to cultivate, served in the form of bread and porridge. Starting in 1846, writer and activist Sarah J. Hale wrote a letter to every sitting American president, asking him to declare a national day of Thanksgiving. At the time, only New Englanders celebrated the day. No president acted on Hale's urging until 1863, when Abraham Lincoln set apart the last Thursday of November as a day of thanksgiving and praise to God. America was at war. Her bonds of unity had been broken. Lincoln called Americans to embrace the holiday soberly. With humble penitence for our national perverseness and disobedience, commend to God's tender care all those who have become widows, orphans, mourners, or sufferers in the lamentable civil strife in which we are unavoidably engaged, and fervently implored the interposition of the Almighty hand to heal the wounds of the nation and to restore it. In 1939, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt changed the designated day. Concerned that the holiday shopping season was not long enough to fuel the nation's recovering economy, he moved Thanksgiving to the second to last Thursday in November. 16 states opposed the change. For the following 2 years, Thanksgiving was celebrated on 2 different Thursdays. In 1941, Congress passed a law making the 4th Thursday in November America's Thanksgiving Day. Norman Rockwell, America's favorite illustrator, descended from Mayflower voyagers, the non-Separatists Stephen and Elizabeth Hopkins. His beloved images captured the American spirit's gentler side, as did this one of an American family on Thanksgiving Day. It is titled Freedom from Want, and is a reminder of the meal that crowned the Pilgrims' first year in America. Another, called Freedom of Worship, heralds the Pilgrims' hope and their enduring legacy in the American story.